Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video we have another lovely excerpt from my secret language podcast over on Patreon. This was a wonderful question I got about why is it that as native speakers, sometimes when talking to somebody who's learning our language, sometimes it can be effortless and then sometimes it can actually be almost exhausting, kind of tiring and hard to follow along. And as learners of languages, how can we try to be the first one, right? How can we make it easy and comfortable for native speakers to talk to us? And I think it's a really good question, and it kind of brought up this really good topic, which I think is actually one of the most overlooked aspects of actually becoming, I would say, not just a good speaker of a foreign language, but an effective communicator in a foreign language, right? Because communication is, of course, a two-way process. And so even if you choose all the right words, you use good grammar, you construct good sentences, if the other person does not understand your message in the way that it was intended, then you still haven't effectively communicated. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So I hope you enjoy the excerpt, and if you of course enjoy this, if you want to get access to the full 1 hour episode and all the other episodes, episode 5 is coming out next week. I'm just about to start collecting questions for the next round of episodes in a few days from now. So much fun stuff, all kinds of lovely content like my weekly diary videos that I do as well for Patreon supporters. So all that is available at the link down below. But enough of that rubbish for now, let's just jump into the video. Welcome back to the Secret Language Podcast, exclusively available here on Patreon. I'm your host, MacPherson, and this is a show where I answer your questions about all kinds of topics ranging from language learning tips, methods, and advice to personal stories from my own experience learning and speaking languages out in the world. So grab yourself a drink, maybe a snack, and let's jump into today's episode. Okay, so moving on to question 4, I should probably try to speed up a bit here. So Cassandra asks, what does it take to get to a point where it is easy for a native speaker to converse with you? Yeah, so for example, I feel like I am tripped up by accent more than grammar when listening to non-native English speakers. There are some people who speak and I get maybe 50%, even though their English is fine. It's just that their accent is strong enough and very different. So often, for example, a native Chinese speaker might speak English very confident and quickly, but if they have a strong enough accent, I might get lost and my brain starts to tire. And then she kind of gives more context here. So, so I think this is a great question. And in my opinion, I actually think it's very helpful to differentiate between accent or pronunciation specifically versus and kind of break it down into smaller components. And for me, I think that rhythm and intonation are actually the things that are most important here. What I have found, this is just kind of my experience, is that if somebody has an excellent pronunciation, right? They make the right sounds, they pronounce the words well. But if they have really strange rhythm and intonation and word stress, it like completely throws me off and it's very difficult to follow. On the contrary, I have found that even someone that has quite a strong accent with their pronunciation, but that speaks with the correct rhythm and puts the stress in the right places and has the right intonation, I have no problem following them. And so I think that it's really helpful as you're learning. And by the way, this is why I'm going to talk about this a lot more, I think, in future videos, because I've been doing a lot of reading and I'm finding a lot of really interesting evidence that I think supports the way that I practice speaking languages by myself, right? Which has become a big thing people have found me through. I think this is the kind of thing that is really useful to focus on when you're doing that. And it's hard to do this when you're talking to other people. So when I'm, practicing by myself, sometimes it's just simply putting your focus instead of just trying to speak as one whole thing, having some focused practice around getting the rhythm right, getting the intonation right, and working on where is the stress in the words. I find that to be very, very helpful. Even just having some deliberate practice in speaking clearly, right, can be very helpful. And I also think this is kind of good news, because I think that rhythm and intonation are actually easier to get really accurate with compared to pronunciation, because pronunciation has additional physical barriers, right? Like, for example, some people have a lot of trouble just making the sounds, right? Some people can't roll their R's. Some people have a lot of trouble with the French R, the merci. There's the Russian, in like blue. So many examples in so many languages. For me, in Mandarin Chinese, the R is also really challenging. I still have trouble with that, actually. It's one of the few sounds where it's taken me so long to just get comfortable with it, and I'm still figuring it out in a way. So with pronunciation, there can be actual physical barriers that can, in some cases, be very difficult to overcome, especially if you just physically cannot figure out how to roll your R's. That can be really challenging for people, and it can be very demotivating, even if it is possible to eventually figure it out, but it's not so simple. I feel like rhythm, just figuring out the rhythm, simply putting the stress in the right places on words, I think that's something that has a lot less of that barrier. I think it just takes a deliberate practice. I think that's what's missing, is lots of people don't ever practice that deliberately. They just practice speaking, and so they get really confident and they start speaking really, really fast. But because they're speaking so quickly, and when they get the rhythm wrong, when they put the stress in the wrong place, it like throws you off just a split second, where you need that extra half second to process it. And if they're doing this really quickly and it's happening again and again and again, then you start to get like 3 or 4 seconds behind in your comprehension, and now all of a sudden it gets very tiring. Now you're actually having to exert like energy and effort just to keep up. I think that's the exact feeling that you're describing. So those are my thoughts, and that's my advice, I think, in terms of for people who are the person speaking the language and that want to be able to have that native speaker converse with you comfortably. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Cassandra, if that resonates with you. And of course, anybody else listening, I'd love to hear if that makes sense, if you agree, disagree. And I also do think that also things like using the right words. There are a lot of times I speak to people who have probably not learned from a lot of authentic content, right? And so they might use words and phrases that just don't fit, or that like we would never say. And that can have the same impact, right? It throws you off just enough to where you're like, wait, what was that word? And then now you're behind, and now you're struggling to keep up with what they're trying to tell you. But yeah, I really like this point about rhythm and intonation and stress.